There is a manufacturing floor in Toyota City where, decades ago, a junior line worker noticed a flaw in a process his supervisor had personally designed. He didn't say nothing. He didn't storm into the supervisor's office and declare the process broken. Instead, within a week, the process was quietly revised. The supervisor's authority was left fully intact in front of the team, and the worker was known from that point on as someone whose input was worth seeking out. Meanwhile, somewhere else right now, someone is sitting in a meeting, watching their manager propose a plan they know has a serious flaw, saying nothing at all, because the last time they raised a concern directly, it cost them a promotion. Same basic dynamic, a subordinate who sees something a superior has missed. Completely different outcome. What if the difference between being heard and being punished has almost nothing to do with how right you are, and almost everything to do with 7 quiet habits that shape how disagreement gets delivered up a hierarchy? By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what those 7 habits are and why they let you raise a real concern to your boss without it costing you anything. Before we walk through the habits themselves, we need to address an assumption most people carry into workplace disagreement. The assumption is this: if you're right, and you say so clearly and directly, a reasonable boss should be able to hear it without taking offense. This sounds fair, but it ignores how authority actually works psychologically, because a direct challenge, however factually correct, is processed by most people in power not just as information, but as a small public test of their status. And status threats trigger defensiveness, regardless of how accurate the challenge is. The actual goal isn't proving you're right in the moment. It's getting the correct information adopted without forcing your boss to publicly lose face, to accept it. This is the piece almost every assertiveness framework quietly skips. The real Japanese term, Nemawashi, literally preparing the roots before transplanting, informal groundwork laid individually before an idea is ever raised in a group setting. The practice, rather than raising a disagreement for the first time in a meeting in front of others, the concern is first shared privately, one-on-one, giving the boss time to consider it without an audience watching how they respond. The scientific validation. Organizational psychologists studying upward feedback have found that concerns delivered privately before a group setting are adopted at significantly higher rates than the same concerns raised for the first time publicly, because private delivery removes the audience effect that makes reversing a position feel like losing status. The second habit concerns how the disagreement itself is framed linguistically. The real Japanese term midasanai, not disrupting harmony, applied here specifically to word choice rather than avoidance of the issue itself. The practice. Rather than stating a flaw as a direct correction, this is wrong. It's framed as a question inviting joint discovery. I wonder if we've considered what happens if, which raises the identical substantive concern while positioning the boss as a collaborator in finding the answer rather than a target being corrected. The scientific validation. Linguistics research on face-threatening speech acts has found that questions framed as joint inquiry produce measurably less defensive response than direct statements carrying the same informational content, because the grammatical structure itself signals collaboration rather than confrontation. The third habit is about timing relative to the emotional state of the room. The real Japanese term, Kuuki wo yomu, reading the air, sensing whether the current moment can actually absorb difficult information. The practice, a concern that could easily be raised, is deliberately held. If the boss is visibly stressed, rushed, or already defending a decision to someone else, and is instead raised later, when there's genuine capacity to consider it rather than merely react to it. The scientific validation. Research on decision-making under cognitive load has found that people evaluate challenging information far more rigidly when already stressed or time-pressured, meaning identical feedback delivered at a calmer moment produces measurably more open consideration. The fourth habit involves who else is present when the concern is raised. The real Japanese term, mentsu, face, specifically protecting a superior's face in front of their own superiors or peers, not just in front of subordinates. The practice, a disagreement that might be perfectly safe to raise privately, is never raised in front of the boss's own boss, or in front of peers the boss is trying to impress, regardless of how relevant the audience might otherwise seem. The scientific validation. Studies on status hierarchies have found that the perceived cost of accepting correction rises sharply when the audience includes the person's own evaluators, meaning identical feedback is received completely differently depending on who else is in the room. The fifth habit concerns how much of the solution is offered alongside the problem. The real Japanese term, teian, proposals, specifically the practice of never raising a flaw without simultaneously offering at least one workable alternative. The practice. Rather than stopping at "this won't work," the concern always arrives paired with a specific, ready-to-consider alternative, shifting the boss's task from defending against criticism to evaluating a choice between two options. The scientific validation. Negotiation research has found that criticism paired with a concrete alternative is accepted at substantially higher rates than criticism alone because the recipient's cognitive task shifts from justifying a decision to comparing two paths forward, which is a fundamentally less threatening mental operation. The sixth habit is about who gets credit once the concern is adopted. The real Japanese term, kage no kouken, contribution from the shadows, quiet, uncredited influence, deliberately not claimed publicly by the person who originated it. The practice. Once a boss adopts a suggested change, the employee who raised it doesn't publicly claim credit for the correction, allowing the boss to present the revised decision as their own evolved thinking rather than as a reversal forced by a subordinate. The scientific validation. Research on face-saving and cooperation has found that individuals who allow superiors to retain public credit for adopted suggestions receive more of their future input actively solicited compared to those who visibly claim credit, because visible credit claiming makes a superior warier of engaging with that person's ideas again. The seventh and final habit is the quietest of all, and it concerns the relationship after the disagreement has been resolved, not during it. The real Japanese term, on wo keisu, returning a debt of kindness, specifically here the practice of actively supporting a boss's revised decision afterward, visibly and without reservation, as though it had always been the plan. The practice, once a concern has been addressed and a decision changed, the employee who raised it becomes one of its most visible supporters, rather than someone who quietly reminds others, "I told them so." The scientific validation. Research on trust repair in hierarchical relationships has found that visible post-disagreement loyalty measurably increases a superior's future receptiveness to that person's input because it demonstrates the original disagreement was about the decision, not a challenge to the relationship itself. As you've seen, disagreeing with a boss without losing your job has very little to do with being right and everything to do with 7 quiet habits that shape how disagreement gets delivered. Lay groundwork privately through Nemawashi. Frame concerns as joint inquiry through wa-wo midasanai. Read the room's capacity through kuuki wo yomu. Protect face in front of the right audience through mentsu. Pair every problem with a proposal through teian. Let credit stay quiet through kage no kouken. And support the outcome visibly afterward through on wo kaise. None of it requires staying silent when you see something wrong. It requires delivering the truth in a form your boss can actually accept without losing status to accept it. If this changed the way you think about speaking up at work, please like this video and subscribe so we can continue unlocking this kind of practical Japanese wisdom together. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 habits do you think would be hardest to practice in your own workplace? Leave it in the comments below. Until the next video.